considering the time you've spent with both your subjects, I want to ask you, and I'll start with Rick, which is more important for a leader, for an effective leader, certainty or flexibility?
Well, I have to say, I think flexibility. And I think that Mandela has always embodied that. I would, in the beginning of our sessions together, working together on Long Walk to Freedom, his autobiography, I'd have questions prepared like you do today, Adi, and I would say, Madiba, when you decided that the ANC had to embrace violence, was that because you had to bring the rank and file into the ANC, or was it because you thought you needed the publicity to show that you were still fighting the government? And he'd listen to my questions and he would kind of look at me quizzically, and at first he would try to answer them, and after a few weeks of working together, he would look at me and he'd say, why not both? I mean, why not both was his kind of motto for so many things, and to me it was partially an example of flexibility, that basically both sides always have, not always, but often have some kernel of credibility and something that's important to reconcile. And he was ultimately a pragmatist. He had one overarching goal, which was democracy for his people, but almost anything that would help him get there was a tactic or a strategy. In fact, when the ANC renounced the nonviolent Gandhian approach, he said to me, well, that was just a tactic. That's not a principle. And so to me, the pragmatism of his leadership and the pragmatism of so many great leaders, to me, is not about certainty. It might be having one certain goal and destination, but it's about flexibility in terms of how you get there. And I think he showed that throughout his career.
And what about Obama? Is his greatness about what he's certain about, or his ability to be flexible?
The true answer is probably both, but just for fun, I'll disagree with Rick. And look at healthcare, which is the key, certainly domestic policy achievement of this administration so far, and maybe to the end of its time in office. How did he get there? Well, as soon as they got into office, facing the economic problems they were facing, everybody around Barack Obama of any real importance, Rahm Emanuel, David Axelrod, and so on, said, you know what, we need to back off of this healthcare promise. If we do it, we can't do it now. I don't know if we'll be able to do it at all. We're facing a potential depression. We have to focus, as one president said, like a laser beam, on the economy as such. Obama insisted on going forward with healthcare, insisted on it. So it's hard to say. It's situational. In that case, it was certainty. It was also the fact that there are 60 votes in the Senate and a big majority in the House of Representatives. Let's not forget that. And the whole rhetoric of reconciliation and bipartisanship eventually had to go out the window, and he won on the numbers. He won on the numbers. And any act of reconciliation that was ultimately very important was within his own party. It was getting Blue Dog Democrats on board, not Republicans. There were no Republicans voting for this. So to me, it's a great question, but it's situational.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the answer, of course, is always both, and it's a combination of the two. I mean, Nelson Mandela is a very stubborn fellow, too. But he also had a different style of leadership that was a kind of traditional African style of leadership. He and I used to take these early morning walks, particularly when he was out in the Transkei, where he had a house near where he was born, and very early morning walks. And one morning, as we were walking, he said to me, and this will get a rise out of both of you, he said, Richard, have you ever herded cattle before? As you know, I've never herded cattle before. So I said, no, I haven't. Why do you ask? And he said, he used an elaborate kind of anecdote to say that leadership was a little bit like herding cattle, which is that you do it from the back. You identify some of the herd, you point them in the right direction, and then you lead from the back. And that was a traditional African style of leadership. And in meetings that I saw that he had with people, you know, and his cabinet and his close advisors, he would often not speak at all until the very end, and then he would talk and summarize what had happened, what people had said, and sort of nudge people in the direction that he wanted them to go. It wasn't at all like that kind of, you know, jumping out of the trench and yelling charge and saying follow me. It was a different style of leadership.
Precisely, and I think, remember, Obama is not a prophetic leader. He is not Martin Luther King leading the way and pushing from the outside in. He is inside. He is power itself. There's a big, big difference. And even if he's able to echo the movement in ways that help him politically during a campaign.
But trust, public trust in a leader sometimes depends on, the perception that there's not a gap between the public person, the private person. I mean, do you see the potential for a gap that could cause?
I think we understand this about politicians if we're mature. We understand that politicians don't always say everything they believe at every given moment. We know that. We just do. And and it's up to us sometimes to have to divine where that politician might be, not just now, but 6 months from now or a year down the line. Again, look at the confusion over gays in the military. This is a fantastic example of not everybody saying what they believe, with the exception sometimes of the most conservative military who are saying precisely what they believe. So I think this is an understanding that historically we have about politicians all the time.
I want to close on, Rick, in your book you say that sometimes when you're posed with a challenge, what runs through your head is, what would Nelson Mandela do? So what exactly runs through your head? What are the principles and the ideas that you consider?
Well, one of those principles is that, when you're asking yourself that question, it's usually a moment of stress or being tested. And one of the things I realized from Mandela was that oftentimes I would talk to him and I'd ask him, how are you feeling at that point? And he would say, I was scared, I was terrified. And what you realized about him is one of the great heroes of all time, talking about being afraid. And he would always say you had to put up a front, you had to pretend to be courageous and brave even when you were not. And that's a wonderful lesson for everybody, and I think a wonderful lesson for all leaders. It's not that you don't feel that anxiety or that concern or that worry, but you have to figure out and reach down into something inside of you and come up with something to combat it. And he was able to do that. I think Barack Obama is able to do that, and that's part of the reason that they're both successful.
David, do you find yourself wondering what would Barack Obama do?
Sometimes when I'm faced between two desert island cartoons and having to choose, I ask myself, what would Barack Obama do?
Yeah.
And it's the only thing I think. No,
Rick thinks about it when he's asked to herd cattle.
It is more than humbling to know the difference of the consequences of what one does as a magazine editor as opposed to these people. There's no question about it. But, sometimes there are stakes, and, when faced with by necessity having to make a very quick decision about publishing or not on a story like Abu Ghraib or stories of that magnitude, as opposed to funnier things that we do or fiction or what have you, I often think about what Ben Bradlee would do. And I know that Ben Bradlee's front was of a kind of swashbuckling, devil-may-care editor who was fearless. But I also know, if you know more about Ben Bradlee than just the cartoon of him, that he was extremely thoughtful about it and made decisions based on a lot of components. For example, in a military story, whether people are going to get killed as a result of such a story. It's very easy as an editor to just say, we publish everything, and and in fact, you should be courageous. The idea is to get things in the magazine, not out of the magazine. But it also pays to be extremely thoughtful and to weigh these decisions extremely carefully, sometimes quickly. But the cartoonish bravery of an editor has to be also figured into thinking things through. Otherwise, it's too easy. Anybody could do it.
Okay, I want to thank you both. This is a great discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adi.